Good day, 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 good morning, good evening, good pre-evening, good day, good day. And welcome to sim.bc. Hello! Wait, right now it's 12:34 and a most brilliantly gloomy day outside with all the gray in the air, and you can really feel how if depression had a weather condition, it would probably be this. But we will not let that fool us. We will not let that bring us down as of today. Why? Well, because today, as we're going to get right into it, we're going to talk about Mark Zuckerberg's hearing and his testimony, because there was one thing, and believe me, I sat through about 7 hours, 6 hours and 58 and a half minutes to be precise, of this hearing that you can find on the Washington Post's YouTube page here on YouTube, and I will obviously link it down below in the description if you want to check it out for yourself and create yourself or get yourself a cohesive understanding of the entire hearing, which I do, and I truly do recommend you to go there and watch it all. I mean, I watched the first 1.5 hours and it was all about different newspapers and news agencies talking about what Zuckerberg said and what has been happening the previous day, given a bit of context, yeah, even if I thought it was a very biased context they were given, or that they were giving, presenting the viewer. However, after 1.5 hours with the introduction and when we got into the actual hearing, it was just non-stop. I was hooked, yeah, for the upcoming, what was it, 4.5, 5 hours? I was hooked on the discussion that they had with like two short 5-minute intermissions in between, but it was amazing, and I, as I said, totally recommend you to go and watch it. But we're gonna discuss some of those things right here as of today, and I will mention in the end 2 of the highlights, or rather 3 of the highlights that I do recommend you to check out in conjunction with all of these things. And something else that I want to say before we move forward is that I took out the idea of national and what actually makes you a Swede, what makes you a French person, what makes you connect to a specific country, and we'll probably continue and follow up on that little question that I kind of left up in the air, so to say, about the global people in the end of yesterday's video in a future video going forward. But I thought, why not talk about Zuckerberg? And I would just love to say that during the during the hearing, someone referred to him as Mr. Zuckerman, and it was hilarious. But without any further ado, as all the YouTubers out there say, yeah, without any further ado, but I couldn't come up with anything else to say right here in the short intermission, except with any further ado, so we're gonna say without any further ado, mates, let's get into the content. And I would like to diverge, yeah? I would like to shift your focus to 3 hours and 20 minutes roughly into the hearing, when Mark Zuckerberg was given the question I think is really interesting, that didn't really, in my opinion, yeah, have anything to do with the hearing whatsoever, but it was still kind of an interesting discussion point and something quite interesting that I would like to take up. And that was, people were looking at his leadership schematics and his leadership team, or rather his board of directors, his board of leaders, the people on the website who were, well, designated and who were assigned, who were shown to be the leadership of Facebook. And someone pointed out that you have no Afro-American leader in your leaderboard. And I sat there and I was like, I need to make a note of this. So I did, and I'm just gonna read it for you straight off. And this reads as follows. 3 hours and 20 minutes into Zuckerberg's testimony, one of the most stupid questions I've ever heard from a source with legitimized power, qualified and widespread influence, and of holding of official status in government. You cannot just quote in people. That's how you get people to be against diversity. Oh yeah, and I also said Zuckerberg, brilliant in most occasions. Now, important to mention is that I'm saying go and check it out for yourself, so you get your own understanding of what you know, the transparency of the entire thing and the how things actually went down. But this is yet again my perception of it, and I might be biased in my opinion about this. Now, to just lay down a statement before we move into this specific point that they were taking up about diversity leadership. I'm all for diversity. You probably should know this by now if you follow the channel for any, a certain amount of time. I do think that diversity is so important, especially when it comes to looking at a problem. You have people from different walks of life and different schools of thought looking at the same problem from different points of view, coming up with the most, probably in theory, right, the most efficient solutions, in comparison to if everybody were of the same ethnicity looking at the same problem from the same perspective. Wouldn't probably, in theory and probably in practice as well, wouldn't yield the same amount of innovation as if we were looking at the same problem from different points of view. Which is why it is deemed to be really important to have these different people in, your leadership positions, because how do we know, especially for Facebook, that is such a big multinational corporation as they do take up. He is one of the most successful success stories of our generation, of our time, right? And people would most certainly refer to him when they refer to the great minds of the early 21st century. I can 100% agree with that statement. But then they also took up the idea of you kind of need to have this diversity influence in your leadership board. So with that in mind, with that context established, and the idea why it's important to mention that it's a multinational corporation is that, well, basically what Mark Zuckerberg also raised the issue of is that, well, what is deemed to be socially acceptable and culturally acceptable and religiously acceptable and just regulation acceptable overall is different from each and every individual country, because this hearing was very focused on the American way, the American spirit, the American innovation, and the American success story. They were saying American in each and every goddamn sentence, and it really pissed me off, because I was like, are you sure? I understand that you're in court or whatever, but dude, I understand that you're in America. Can you style it down? But still they were talking about this very American way, but they were still saying that, well, you still need to have a very diverse workforce and leadership. Now, I'm getting to the point, right? I'm going to discuss the point. And that is that one of the chairmen, I'd say, proposed the idea and said that it's a real big issue and a real big problem that you don't have any Afro-American in your board of directors or in your leadership board, at least as is stated on your website. Now, I would just like to meet that criticism, with another criticism of that entire statement, and that is that if you quote in people, which basically was what it sounded like, because he was like, you need to work on this specific issue, right? If you just quote in people, let's say you just quote in people, which is probably on one end of the spectrum the worst thing you can possibly do. You throw in someone who is competent, who do have a different kind of view, and shove them into the leadership position. Now that could arguably be good, but it also means that you're probably going to skip other people who were in line for that position if you just throw them in, so to say, and it doesn't follow any form of logical sense within itself in the company. Now I do recognize that this sometimes needs to be done in order to, move these diversities into, or move these minorities into leadership positions to begin with, so that they can start actually promoting similar minorities, so that it's opened up for the possibility that minorities can get promoted in and within the company. But I do not think that is a problem for Facebook in and within itself. However, what I do think is that the leadership position and the leadership team looks like it does because, well, it was founded by Mark Zuckerberg and his peers and is probably his friends, and then he has promoted people that he was very close with, who was working with them in the early 2000s, and those people are probably generally becoming the leadership team. That's how I view it, right? I might be really wrong, I might be exactly right. You can go and check that out and double check that for yourself. And then this guy just comes along and say that you need to have more African Americans. As I said, it's a really good thing that you try to shove in diversity, right? I mean, at times, it's always good to have diversity. In 99.9% of the time, it's good to have diversity represented in your company for the obvious reasons that I stated before. However, right, just keep in mind that this chairman didn't focus on the fact that you need diversity in form of different cultural perceptions, which I think is the one true thing that is really important when you bring in diversity, is that you have different cultural perceptions and that you have different different religious perceptions, you have different standards, different social norms, right? Those are the things that's really important with diversity. Just saying that you should have an Afro-American that's in my eyes, that's more a statement of, oh, you need to have someone of this quote unquote race that some people say. You need to have someone who is have a different skin tone in your leadership position, which I think is absolutely ludicrous, right? Because based on what we were discussing yesterday, we were talking about what is actually making me a Swede. What's in that same train of thought would make you an American, right? So it doesn't really matter what you look like. It's more a matter of which country are you from. Now, it might be the case, and I have not checked into this, that all of the leadership, all the people in the leadership position, and as stated on the website, are from the same country. Now, I would argue that that is a problem, a much bigger problem than if all of them, well, looked the same or looked different. See what I'm saying here? I don't mind if you have women and men of all different colors, right, represented in your leadership board. But that is equally as big of a problem as it is keeping the leadership board as of now, if they're not from different cultures, not from different nations, not from different walks of life, they're not different from any school of thought, because that brings in the same problem, just bringing in people, just bringing in people who look different doesn't really reinforce diversity. Sure, it may look more diverse, but in today's society where we are so many people who look so very differently but are all part of the same country, just brings on it reinforces the problem rather than solving it. So if you think about the things that I'm saying is really good about diversity, and I know that I'm just reiterating the same points, kind of a theme, by the way, if you look at the different chairmen and chairwomen that was representing in the court that during Mark Zuckerberg's voluntary testimony, I might add, which is really courageous and really good. I wish that more companies did that. Anyway, they were still reiterating the same points over and over again because they had some points that I wanted to ask, and then they were reiterating them if someone else had already stated them, which is kind of funny to look at because it looked like they didn't listen, but obviously they did, and they had researched different questions that they did want to have answers to. However, I might reiterating the same question, or the same point over and over again. But what I'm trying to say is that the problem that diversity is trying to fix is the idea that we don't have a very monotone way of thinking, right? We want to have different ways of thinking. Just by shoving in men and women, and just by shoving in, well, in a certain degree, some people might argue that having men and women will lead to a different perception of how we go about things. And I can tend to agree to a certain extent that that might be true. However, some people are also saying that, well, if we just shove in people of different color, that will make it so that we don't have a monotone way of doing things. We will actually have a very diverse idea of how we go about things. And I'm saying that, nah, not necessarily. That might look like you do have a diverse workforce, a diverse leadership position. However, if all of these people who, quote-unquote, look different, right, are from the same country, from the same area, from the same town, and from the same university, chances are, yeah, or rather the risk in this case, is that all of these people are going to behave, think, and argue in exactly the same way as each other. Which means that even though you look very diverse, that might not necessarily mean that you are very diverse. So, as I understood it, this chairman at 3 hours and 20 minutes into the hearing, based on the video that I was watching, suggested to Mark Zuckerberg that you need to have more Afro-Americans in your leadership position. And I'm just sitting here, right, and I'm thinking, now this is a generalized statement. They only had 4 minutes each, which is very important to mention and very important to keep in mind, so they couldn't actually flesh out their idea or what they actually meant. However, it seemed though that they had the opportunity to follow up with Mark Zuckerberg afterwards and before the meeting. So I'm wondering, why state such a question in such a way publicly on a live feed, right, that will end up on the internet and probably was sent live on other channels as well, in such a generalized way? Because to me, it just seems like, or rather it sounds like, you want to have people in the leadership positions that just look different, not that are any different, which in my opinion, right, is the bigger issue here. Just because you have people who look different doesn't really necessarily mean that they will act any different, and that's the kind of thing that you want to access with diversity. I would rather say have them all look the same, and pick them from different countries. That's more, and that obviously that isn't the most optimized solution, and you obviously shouldn't be selective in your hiring process based on that people should look the same. Neither should you do it by them looking differently, just because you want to, represent a different workforce or diverse workforce. You should do it based on merit. That's my opinion, right? But you should take into consideration where in the world they're from. So I'd say, rather than that, you have people from the same, and this is obviously going to be one side of the spectrum, generalizing it and looking and comparing it to the other side of the spectrum. But I would rather have people who all look exactly the same from all different countries and behaved very differently than people who looked starkly different and were really different looking, but all came from the same university, from the same town, from the same family of friends, and the same social circle, and all thought the same. That might just be my interpretation of diversity, right? So keep that in mind. But I just thought, based on how it was presented at that point, that it was such a bloody stupid way of framing the question. And I do use that term, I do not tend to use that term lightly, like stupid, but in my opinion, that was the only way I can actually convey my idea of what this actually was, because I thought that was really showing that we're taking a step in the wrong direction, bringing that up in that context, especially since we're talking about information sharing and how Facebook is handling data. For instance, one of the big things was that they were talking about that Facebook is selling data, and how can their business model be working without them selling data. Now, the thing is that they don't sell data. It is just that the scandal in relation to this hearing was that it accidentally happened. Based on that, it shouldn't have happened. And then yet again, people were saying that, how can you retain your business model if you don't sell information? And Zuckerberg was like, we don't sell information, we share information. Which can sound the same to many of you out there, but basically selling, they don't sell for personal gain, but they do let you share your information with each other. That's my interpretation. Yet again, go watch the hearing or read just Facebook's mission and vision statement. That's probably accessible on their website. Some other key moments though that I would like to mention as well is 4 hours and 54 minutes in, where that was a really good point, well proposed, but also raises the issue of that many people don't care about their own safety online. Plus, so good formulation about government intervention, which basically was, if I can remember this right, based on my very abstract notes, was that someone was talking about that the government either intervenes and overreacts, or it just stays back and doesn't do anything. So basically hinting to Zuckerberg that you keep this in mind, because otherwise, if we are forced to interact, we will probably overreact, which isn't good for the industry either. Whilst Zuckerberg, on the other hand, was talking about that regulations probably is only going to hurt small businesses, that the regulations were seen to improve the behavior of small businesses. But Zuckerberg was like, we can relate to these different regulations that you might add. We're flexible towards that because we have the capital, we have the cash, we have the knowledge, we have the everything, right? But smaller businesses might not. So you're actually hindering smaller businesses by saying that you want to implement regulations, which I thought was really interesting, since I'm looking into small to medium-sized enterprises and startups in our thesis at the moment. And also in 5 hours and 2 minutes was also a good formulation on behalf of government regulation and intervention. So why it's actually good, which was basically, if someone was doing this, selling information, what is the actual repercussion? How can you follow up on this incident, and how can you make sure that it doesn't happen again? Which I thought was a really interesting point of view. Now I see that we're running out of time, so I'm also going to mention that Joe Kennedy, I think it was called, had some really good cutthroat questions as well that was well formulated. So look out for that as well if you do go check it out. Yet again, I highly recommend that you go watch it, and we will probably maybe mention this idea of what makes you a Swede, what makes you American, whatever, in a future video, as I was talking about yesterday. But it was just looking at that for a casual 7 hours yesterday, so I thought, why not bring it up? And it was kind of related to that as well, because of diversity and generalization of how you look, which shouldn't actually make any difference. So that was everything for me today, mates. Have a nice one. I'll see you tomorrow with a new video, a new exciting video. Go check it out.